opposition to the amendment because it already is common knowledge that undocumented individuals cannot obtain public housing. Your amendment would further burden and restrict access to those who are in need of assistance, and the goal of this bill is to prevent homelessness. Your amendment, my friend, would simply add further burdens to those trying to help those who have either lost their identification or have never obtained it in the first place. And then also, all recipients of assistance are already required, as I stated before, to either be citizens or prove lawful immigration status. The new requirements would primarily harm U.S. citizens, many of them who do not possess narrow-range identification document permitted under the restricted new requirement. And then also, the housing program allows for proration of assistance to those assured that the benefits are provided to those individuals who meet eligibility rules. And the proposed restrictions attempts to do away with the proration instead of disqualifying every member of a household. It would be fundamentally unfair and potentially unconstitutional, and I state unconstitutional, to punish individuals who meet all program requirements because they live in the same household as someone who is unwilling or unable to comply with the requirement. In other benefit programs such as Medicare, Medicaid agencies provide assistance while individuals work to obtain copies of required documents. The proposed restriction offers no common sense flexibility. As a result, the entire households could be terminated from assistance even if one member who is not even seeking assistance is making his or her best effort to comply with the new flexibility document requirement. Therefore, I'm against this amendment, and as I stated before, it's totally unconstitutional.
Gentleman yield.
Further debate.
Mr.
The
Chairman.
gentleman yields to the gentleman from Georgia.
Yes.
And I appreciate your comments, but the intent of the amendment, as you identified, is simply to try to make certain that those individuals who are appropriately taking advantage of a public program are in fact legal citizens or here legally. So if there's a better way to do that,
Reclaiming my time, the law already is in place that already says that. So what are you doing when the law is already stating that?
Will the gentleman yield? And because I think the law states that the individual must attest that he or she is
You'll take
legal.
back time. It's already in the law already. So what you're doing is you're contradicting yourself because there's already a law that's already in place that says non-documented can obtain housing. It's in there. However, undocumented immigrants are already ineligible for housing vouchers. They're not eligible for housing vouchers.
Will the gentleman yield for question?
Sure.
The current law, how do you see the current law describing the process by which an individual determines whether or not somebody is legal or a citizen?
How do you determine that?
How does the current law determine that?
The new requirement would primarily, it would harm a lot of the U.S. citizens and not, let's see, I'm trying to think in terms of, first of all, any person who applies in would have to determine whether they are documented or undocumented. And in that would determine by law already that they're not eligible.
My concern is that we don't specify how anybody determines whether or not. It's now the attestation of the person simply saying, I'm legal. And the purpose of the amendment is to say, well, there ought to be some documentation that, in fact, they are a citizen or here legally.
Right. But they must be citizen. That is the law. So it's already in place.
By their own...
No, by our laws, by our constitutional laws.
Right, but by their own attestation.
No, by our constitutional laws. It says they must be a citizen.
Yield for a second?
Yes, I yield.
How does one document whether one is eligible for an interest deduction? You sign a tax return that is a verification. There's no set of things that identifications that one has to show to do that. If there's some reason for suspicion, then the government has the right to go and investigate the reason for that suspicion. And that's the same thing that applies here. If there's a reason for the government to believe that somebody's abusing the certification, then they can go and investigate that.
And this amendment would simply put another check in that process.
You know, reclaiming my time, Mr. Price, let me ask you a question. How did you prove...
Is there agreement since the gentleman was good about yielding? The gentleman have another 2 minutes. Without objection, gentleman from California is recognized for additional 2 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Price, how did you prove that you were a U.S. citizen to become a U.S. congressman?
Signed an attestation and showed that that I had lived in our state. You have to live in the state for a certain period of time prior to being eligible to run. So there was.
But you didn't have to show anything.
Well, sure I did. Absolutely.
The gentleman
I don't know
with
what you do in your state. In Georgia,
would
we have to show identification that we're who we say we are.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes.
Mr. Baca, in California, when you even register to vote, you sign under penalty of perjury that you are a U.S. citizen. It's the very first question asked in the voter registration.
Right. It's the same thing that we have here, too, as well, for any individual, and that's already the law in place.
If the gentleman would yield, I do want to make one constitutional point to the gentleman from Georgia. What Georgia says about running for Congress has been held irrelevant by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has held that the constitutional provisions that say you have to be 25 years of age and have lived in the state for 5 years are exclusive and cannot be added to by the state. So the residency requirement that had to be met was as a matter of fact, they say you have to live in the country for 5 years. Under the U.S. Constitution, you can move into a state on the day of the election and be eligible for the House of Representatives. I yield back to thank the gentleman for yielding. Is there further debate on the amendment? The gentleman from Texas.
Well, I'll just rise in support of this amendment. One of the things we've been talking about in this hearing today is the fact that we're trying to increase the number of vouchers because there are people out there that have unmet needs. And one of the things we want to make sure of is that the people that are citizens of this country have the ability to use those vouchers and not to let people who are not citizens of this country, that are in this country illegally, almost anywhere, somewhere in someone's day or week, or they have to furnish some kind of identification. I feel like every every day, all I'm doing is pulling out some form of identification to either get into an airport or to use a credit card or whatever. And so it bothers me that it's reasonable to ask someone to produce a document that says, yep, I'm an American citizen and I'm entitled to use the benefits that are entitled to being an American citizen. So I support the gentleman's amendment. I would yield to the
If you
gentleman.
yield, can you yield?
I would yield
Would
to
you
the
yield?
gentleman from
I would just,
Massachusetts.
to ease the gentleman's troubles, oh, he does have a spouse pin. I was going to suggest he wear a spouse pin.
No, it's not a
so
spouse
he wouldn't
pin.
be
It's
stopped,
a member
or his
pin.
member pin.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't be asked for identification so much. I'm sorry. that
Well, I
they're
wish you would
doing
tell
that to
some
you.
other people. Not everybody knows what that is.
Well, we'll have
If
to
the gentleman would yield, that's already part of the law. And everything that you stated, it's already part of the law. And this amendment would further attempt to put families on the street. That's what it also does as well on this amendment. There are two aspects of the amendment. One is that you're already required to be a U.S. citizen in order to obtain housing. So that's the law already. It's already in place.
Reclaiming my time, I know that the gentleman doesn't think that anybody's trying to throw anybody out on the street, but what we are trying to make sure is that people that are entitled to utilize services that are being made available from the American taxpayers are in fact eligible for those, and I don't think that's
Right, and that's why the law is already in place to make sure that that happens.
The question now comes on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia. Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Ask for a
The gentleman
recorded
from
vote,
Georgia
Mr.
asked for a recorded vote. A sufficient number having indicated, a recorded vote is ordered. The gentlewoman from Wisconsin is now recognized for an amendment.